Thank everyone for joining us here today. My name is Jonathan Nikkila with 50 Can and joined by Christian Esperias from Our Turn Action Network. And we're thrilled to welcome you to the first Election Essentials webinar, where we are training advocates to impact elections. And we're very appreciative that you're here. We're excited, a little nervous about getting this right. It's obviously our first time doing this, so we want it to be informative, entertaining, and concise. So please bear with us as we work out this series and get better at doing this webinar format. And my only advice is don't make a drinking game out of the ums and ahs that I say, or you're gonna be in a rough place at the end of it. So our goal is to give you information in the form of a presentation, but basically Christian and I, we're gonna make it a back and forth. We both have a lot to share on the topic. So each week, one or the other of us is going to lead the introduction and the other one will contribute. This week I'm leading, next week Christian will. But like I said, we both have a lot to share and contribute. Christian mentioned that we are taking questions at the end. There's a question and answer box in the webinar, and that's where you should go ahead and enter those questions. It says Q&A in the panel. So with that, let's get to more about why we're doing this webinar, introduce the topic. The first is, the subhead really says it all. We're training advocates to impact elections. Christian and I interact with people all over the country who want to know how to engage in politics and do it more effectively. We have information to share, and we love it when someone goes from being an advocate to an electoral advocate. So we have a passion for sharing that information. It is a nonpartisan session. It's not limited to one issue. We're just giving an honest and direct look at how we see you should do this right, and sometimes how you shouldn't do it. And one thing that we emphasize when we talk about this is that politics, we don't believe it's a maybe or if I get around to it. If you're an issue advocate, elections should be an essential part of your work. I know a lot of people think politicians or politics is messy or dirty or uncomfortable. They don't like politicians catering to voters or that concept. But what we're trying to get across is that's exactly how the system was set up. It was during elections that politicians are paying most closely to the issues that voters care about. Not saying that they won't end up siding with you later on, but this is the time they're most focused on what the citizens care about. And if you're not engaged in the election discussion, then you're out in the cold. In addition, this webinar is going to focus on fundamental topics. We want to focus on the basics to help you with the things that you need. We're also going to do some weekly news and insights to be current, talk about things that are happening in the news and how that can apply to you being a better electoral advocate. And then lastly, what it isn't. It isn't every literal thing we could say, and we want to keep it short and concise. Also, there's a lot of smart people that Christian and I have learned from who know this very well. Very little, we're humble in that. Very little we're saying is things that other people don't already know and have expertise in. We also know that political science aside, there's a lot of nuance in politics, and we know no situation is ever identical. So we understand people might have different takes and pushback, and we get it. We're open to that. We just want to give you our experience. And then we're going to do this all in 30 minutes. So 30 to 45 minutes, and then take questions because we want to make sure we are concise with your time. We're also going to do polls during these calls. Like you'll see them pop up on your screen. We want to ask you for your feedback and thoughts on different things. So Christian, that's the rundown of my intro. Tell people why you wanted to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jonathan mentioned, these are the essentials. This project really came around in our organization. We're sitting around thinking about COVID and having partner conversations, and everyone was essentially frozen. No one really knew what to do. A lot of people went to that planning phase, and I just thought, all my time that I spent traveling the country, working in coalitions with other organizations, the number one thing I learned is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there with organizations that are doing amazing work in communities or at the legislative level, and they're not marrying the two. And so, I had my hands on Jonathan's book for about 6 months now, and for those who don't know, we get a little taste of it a little later on, but most of this training session is based off a book that he wrote about how to be an advocate and how to get involved in the electoral space. And so I called Jonathan up and I said, let's share this with the masses. Let's have some conversations around the work that you've done about how to really leverage your electoral power. And so that's what we're here to accomplish. We're here to hope that give some insight, give some best practices, but also have a robust conversation about how we get better as a sector about really leveraging our voices and achieving more electoral and policy wins down the line. And so as you see here in this slide, Jonathan, hit me with the next slide. These are the next 6 weeks here. These are the subjects that we're going to be covering. And while Essentials kind of has a connotation that it's 101 or basic, our sentiment is that at the end of the 6 weeks, these are the essentials you'll need to put yourself in a situation to be like a political powerhouse wherever you're at. If you're able to accomplish these things, from being able to vet a candidate on your issues, on their viability, on being able to put together a budget, to learning how to read a poll and write a poll, that will really catapult you to this echelon that very rarefied organizations are at. And so we feel really confident that, again, if our sector is able to adopt this, the magnitude of ripple effect that we would be able to have in our communities, in our society, and just ensuring that, we break the cycle of poverty across this country, I think would be a huge bonus. So we have a few here. And so this is going to be our first poll. So hopefully it works out well. So you see the subjects here. We want to ask you, which subject are you most excited about in the upcoming weeks? Which one are you looking to learn a little bit more about yourself or hear a robust conversation about? And so, like we said, this is 6 weeks long. To steal a line from Jonathan, this is our pilot. This is our sitcom pilot. We've only got a contract for 6 weeks, and we might be canceled or we might be replaced with younger, better looking people that will take over the reins here and really make this marketable. But we really do want this to be engaging, interactive as possible. The question, we have Q&A here. We're going to have polls, but we also have our emails that we're going to share consistently for you folks to share insights, best practices, or questions or topics you'd like us to talk about. And so, my poll went away. But what we're hoping to do is to really ensure that we're giving everyone not only a surface level, but really in depth into each of these. And so we're hoping to accomplish today. And so let's look at the poll here. Perfect. So,
all right. So it looks like folks really want to know how to be effective on a limited budget. My favorite category is what questions you need to ask a lawyer, because I'm a dork and I find that topic really interesting. But
yeah, that speaks volumes about Jonathan. I think you missed your calling in being an attorney.
I should have gone back to more college. All right.
My favorite is the last one, how to read and write polls. I think polling is the backbone of every election when it comes to messaging. And I think this is one place where so many of us outsource it and just trust quote unquote experts on it. And what I found out there is that we often it's a lot of cookie cutter and not a lot of originality. And so you see the same kind of pattern cycle after cycle. So, but I think I think it's fascinating. People want to learn about a budget because the reality is that we often are strapped by the purse strings and have to be conscious of how to make our organization go forward. Yep. So just want to give you a little bit more about Jonathan and myself. So as Jonathan mentioned, my name is Christian Esperias. I'm based out here in Los Angeles. I'm the Senior National Director of Campaign Strategies for Our Turn Action Network, formerly Students for Education Reform Action Network. I spent the last decade in electoral and advocacy work. I began my career as a community organizer and just fell in love with it. I lived and worked in about, I think, 12 states at this point. So really passionate about this work. And as you see here, I've worked from everything from President Obama's campaign in 2012, state governor's races, municipality races, and school board races where Our Turn really focuses on. And so what we're also hoping to accomplish is give you a little bit more insight about ourselves. As Jonathan said, we're not experts. We're not the experts, rather said. There are a lot of intelligent people out there in our sector and beyond our sector. But we hope to give you comfort and assurance that we've done this before. We have 28 years of experience combined, but just also to give you a little insight about ourselves, we wanted to share a little bit about us. And so you might know our organization, we want you to know a little about us and feel comfortable asking questions. So we decided we ask each other what our favorite campaign moment was. And so mine is in 2012, I worked in South Florida for President Obama's campaign. I was a regional director down there, and the lines for voting on early voting for a full week were 4 to 6 hour waits. On election day, they're exactly the same. And it was somewhere past midnight. The lines were still about a 2.5, 3 hour wait. And so I show up with pizzas, and I'm giving pizzas to everyone to make sure they stay in line, to make sure they vote. At this point, the election had been called because Ohio already went blue, but we wanted to ensure that Florida also went blue. And as I'm handing out pizzas, I get to a certain point, and the gentleman reaches for a slice of pizza, and he says, "Hold on, I'm voting for Mitt Romney. Can I have a slice of pizza?" And I laughed and I chuckled. I said, "You can have all the pizza you want. Don't stop. I could care less who you're voting for. Just eat. No one should have to wait this long." And as I waited in this line, continued to hand out water and food for about an hour and a half, he and I sparked up a conversation, and he finally got to vote, came out of the voting booth and came to me and thanked me for the pizza, thanked me for the water and the conversation. He said that he's not going to tell me who he voted for, but let's just say the pizza and the water had an influence on how he cast his vote that way. So that's one of my personal favorite stories that I've had on my campaign trail. Jonathan, we
will add the legalities of handing out pizza in the line at polling places in our lawyer webinar. So that's
don't tell Ezra about that.
Yeah. So thanks, Christian. I love working with Christian. Excited to do this with him. I'm going to put up a poll question while I talk about myself. We want to know what your level of experience is. So we want you to just let us know what you've done in the past politically while I'm going through an introduction to my background. So I'm the Senior Vice President at 50CAN. I've been working in politics and advocacy for about 18 years. I also wear another hat. I am a locally elected member of my city council in Kearney, Nebraska, which I'm really proud to be a part of. I've worked on, like Christian, a lot of different levels of races from federal, state, municipal, school board. He mentioned the guide, the 50CAN Guide to Political Advocacy, and that is something I wrote at the behest of my boss. I really appreciate him pushing me to do it because I got a lot of things down on paper that I've been thinking and doing for a long time and sharing the lessons I've learned. And you're able to go to our website. You can download a PDF for free, or you can actually purchase a hard copy from Amazon. I don't know if it shows up with my backdrop I have, but you can go and buy that hard copy. So one of my favorite experiences, I have a lot, but one of my favorite ones is when I was running for city council, and I remember walking up the sidewalk of a senior citizen, and she looked through her front window and saw me walking up the front, and she had this huge scowl on her face. I don't know if she thought it was a traveling salesman or just that she disliked politicians. I don't know what her scowl was about. It was just a bad day. But I had my two oldest kids, who were 5 and 3 at the time, trailing behind me as we were going up to the door. And as soon as she saw the kids, her face, I saw this transformation in her face from scowl to just joy. And, I knocked on her door. She was super nice, wanted to talk to my kids. And so I'm not above putting my kids out there to help me win votes. So I'll be upfront about me being kind of shameful in that way. But all right, so let's end the poll here. And it looks like wrong way here. So it looks like everyone has been part of a campaign to some degree, volunteered, or they've done multiple aspects. So good to know. All right, Christian, why don't you tell folks about what we've got today? What's on tap for today's webinar?
So here, it's pretty basic today. We'll start with what's interesting. This is a segment we're going to do every week. We wanted to make sure that this is influenced by current events and things that are actually happening on the ground in the political conversation. So every week we'll take a headline from the paper and share why it is interesting, how it may or may not impact our sector, local races, municipal races, federal races, so on and so forth. So we'll get to that. And then we're going to get into the actual topic today, how to vet your candidate if they're right on the issue. Are they serious? And Jonathan will walk us through that, and we'll have time for Q&A. So Jonathan, what's interesting this week?
All right, for me, I have an article that's actually from a week or so ago from Georgia. Pandemic could lessen Georgia legislators' incumbency advantage. And the reason I thought that was interesting, for those that don't know, an incumbent is the elected official currently holding the office in an election. And then we talk about their opponent as the challenger. And as you might know, incumbents have a very strong re-election advantage. In fact, I was doing some research last year and I had seen that in New Jersey, from what I understood, no incumbent had lost a primary challenge for like 3 or 4 election cycles, just crazy numbers. And why is that? Because name identification in a lot of cases is way more valuable than dollars. And so this article, what this article is implying, because it's in some states like Georgia, they cannot raise money during legislative session, but incumbents cannot. Session is not officially ended, they just paused it. Normally it would have ended by now. So the primary's in June, so Georgia legislators are not able to raise money before their primary election. And the article is implying that there's a disadvantage for incumbents because their opponents can go raise whatever they want right now. They, however, cannot raise any money until session reconvenes and then adjourns, which probably is not going to happen before the primary in Georgia. So they're saying opponents have a leg up on the incumbent. My feedback on that is maybe in a few cases, isolated cases, but I think you have to look at the bigger picture. One is opponents usually beat incumbents in these situations by outworking them. And opponents can't door knock. That's the bread and butter in these races of how they beat incumbents. They get out and talk to the voters, and that's not happening. Second of all, any incumbent who's halfway decent has been raising money for a long period of time. And so losing the last month or so of their fundraising cycle shouldn't be a detriment for most of them. And then lastly, I think in the isolated cases, it might hurt, but my assertion would be it's probably cases where the incumbent was already in trouble in their primary. And so it is a thing, but I don't think it's quite the dilemma that they're trying to make out in the article. I don't know, Christian, what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, on the surface, right, it sounds scary. It sounds, my opponent can raise money, can go out there and work. But in the world we're living in, no one can knock doors, which means you're going to throw all your money into TV or into mail. And we'll talk more in depth about the pros and cons of all of those. I see someone from here from Murmuration, and they can speak more to the effectiveness of mail and field and all that. But I think you're right. I think not being able to be out in the field from going to like Rotary clubs to knocking on doors, that really just levels the playing field, and it comes down to name ID. So I'm with you. This is a sexy headline. I think in any other time, this would have been a huge deal. But in the time we're living in, I think it's kind of a moot point.
But for you, you're what interesting. I'll go to you now. Has a little tie to Georgia too. Why don't you talk about what you think is interesting?
Yeah, so I'm sharing this article. It's actually a tweet from the New York Times reporter. And he's sharing how Al Sharpton, behind closed doors, is pushing Joe Biden to advocating for Stacey Abrams, but also for Kamala Harris. And the reason I picked this article is that I think this is a perfect vision of mastery for what we're going to be talking about the next 6 weeks, is really leveraging your advocacy to electoral power. And no one was doing it better for the last like 3 to 4 decades than Al Sharpton. And I think this is another case in point. Al Sharpton is leveraging his name ID, his several years of popularity and community like engagement to get an African-American vice presidential candidate. And so the claim that the article goes on to make is that Joe Biden really needs to pick an African-American woman to be a VP to really energize and mobilize the African-American vote that he'll need to get to 270 this November. This article goes on to say that actually there was a poll done by the Washington Post that said 74% of Democratic African-Americans said that picking an African-American candidate as the vice president nominee isn't important to them. It's not going to be a deciding factor whether or not they vote for the candidate. And so this is kind of, again, this goes to the importance of leveraging your power and having a vision of mastery. The other reason I wanted to drop this in there is because we'll get to this in a few weeks, but polling, how important is polling? Because Joe Biden can come back and say, look at this, 74% of people are going to be with me no matter who I pick. And then the other thing is like, again, going back to the goal this week is like, how do you know your candidate's with you, right? Joe Biden has gone out and made proclamation that he's going to be an ally to the African American communities, to all communities of color, Latino and African American. And so this is Al Sharpton putting his feet to the fire and saying, show me, don't just tell me that you're going to be with us. And so this kind of leads us to our next polling question here, just for fun. And that is, who do you think Joe Biden should pick as his vice presidential nominee?
Yeah, I know for a fact that Joe's watching this poll closely, so weigh in. I think that I feel like vice presidential candidates are always surprises. Maybe not always, but to me, it's always a name I hadn't heard or thought of. So my answer to this poll would be other. I don't know if like presidents don't like overly ambitious candidates who are being overt about their interests. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know, but my take is other. So.
Yeah, I would typically agree with you, but I have this hypothesis that all of our news is now nationalized. Everything is nationalized. No one's looking at their local paper anymore. No one's really looking at local news. It is the big three Goliaths that they watch if they watch the news. And so my personal opinion is that polling will dictate who this is. I think Joe Biden needs to find whoever's going to excite the group of people that aren't with him, which as of right now, it's young people. So I think he's going to rely simply on polling. Who's going to give him to 270? And I find this fascinating. It's a split between Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams. My pick, not because of like absent of like who I think would be the best.
This is nonpartisan. This is your professional advice. Yeah.
I think Elizabeth Warren has the name ID to get the base of people who Joe Biden is struggling with, which is young people, people of color. I think she has a name ID and the essentially taglines to get them excited. I think because of the COVID thing, someone like Stacey Abrams, who has an amazing resume, I think the news coverage the way it is, you can't break her name ID up into the echelons. She can't go on Ellen. She can't go on Oprah the way we used to be able to get candidates on television and get their name ID and their story out there. So I think someone like Stacey Abrams is going to be struggling when it comes to polling.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, everyone got to see our poll here and where people are. Thanks for chiming in, and we'll pass on the information to Joe and go from there. So, well, we're going to kick off now. Get in the content and start rolling. So thanks for everyone and we'll have another question too here. So stay tuned. All right. So our topic this week: are they serious? How do you know if a candidate stands with you on your issues? And why is this important? First of all, it's because candidates are not naturally always the most forthright people. And we're not trying to tell you that it's because they're all liars. I'm not saying there aren't some bad ones out there. But what I like to remind people of is that candidates are humans just like the rest of us, and human nature comes into account. And candidates, they want everyone to like them. They want everyone to vote for them. They want to please everyone. It is a natural instinct that I feel too. We all, when I do my city work. And so because of that, you have to work a little harder to find out where they really are. So why is this important for you as an advocate in elections? Because I'll tell you from experience, there are few things worse than backing a candidate, spending a lot of time and energy and money to support them, and then having to go to your supporters after that candidate flips and votes a different way once they're elected, having to go back and explain that to your supporters after the fact. There's nothing worse. You want to avoid that at all costs. You want to know where they are and back them. A lot of people talk about using politics as an access buying experience, and I will just say I don't think that's, not only are there ethical issues there, but I think that it's not effective either. And maybe the crookedest of crooked politicians, are into this access buying, but honestly, they're probably being bought and sold by both sides. So if you're going to play that game, you're going to lose. And so that's another reason why it's really important to be upfront about where people are, because you really should be focused on the candidates that are with you. That is where your political support should go, not trying to hope that some candidate will, like you more or something like that. So it's really important to flesh this out. And Christian, what do you think? I mean, we've all been wrong before. Is it okay to make a miss once in a while on these sorts of things? What's at stake, you think?
There's a lot at stake, but I think you can't help but make mistakes from time to time. I think if what you can control, what is within your control, is setting guardrails up and making sure, there are going to be people who lie to you. There are going to be people who say one thing and do another once they get in office. But what you can do are things like we're going to talk about, which is questionnaires, interviews, to make sure that you did your due diligence. But there are going to be times you miss, and that's where you really rely on your advocacy until that term is up again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got 3 main points we're going to make to you today about this topic. The first is make them write it down. The second is make them tell you. And the third is corroborate. All right, pretty simple. And the first one is make them write it down, which is a fancy way of saying we think you should have some sort of questionnaire process. And oops, wrong button. And we're going to just throw this out here while we're doing this, while I'm making this introduction. Have you ever participated in a questionnaire process before? We want to know. So fill out the poll and let us know. All right, so make them write that down. So the questionnaire process. First thing I'm going to is go right up front and say what I know everyone's thinking who's participated in this before. Candidates hate it. Candidates hate being told to fill it out. They hate being put in a corner. Again, remember, they want to please people, and the questionnaire forces them to take sides. And they hate having to tell you what they believe. They like to be vague, okay? So what do I tell them when I meet with a candidate to talk about a questionnaire? I say right up front, I know you don't like to fill this out. I just come right up front and let them know that. And I tell them the burden's on me to persuade you that it's worth your time in completing this form. And I also talk about the accountability on my end. I say I'd like to support you in your campaign as well, but the questionnaire is as much accountability for me to go to my bosses to let them know why we're supporting these candidates. So I try to explain to them what it's for. In the end, they're most likely to fill it out because they're aligned with you or because they're hopeful about your engagement in their election. And you are gonna have to work for it, especially when you're a newer organization. And I recommend meeting with campaign consultants, with political party staff, letting them know what you're all about so that they can help also encourage candidates that, hey, this group's safe, we can trust them. Go ahead and fill it out. Next point, provides clarity. So the survey is exactly how you let people know your priorities. They don't know everything you're working on. They don't know what you care about. So they're going to look at that questionnaire and they're going to determine it based on that survey. So if you have 30 questions about any number of topics all over the place, they're going to think you care about all of them, and they're going to wander. They're going to say, well, I support these 10, so maybe I'm on board. Well, that's not good. You don't want to muck it up with those extraneous questions. Don't be repetitive. Just focus on the essentials. I had some friends that I work with at Inks Action, and they provided me a copy of their questionnaire, and I provided one here from their questionnaire, a sample from their questionnaire this year. And the question is, do you support equal funding for charter schools that maintains, you can read it. That's the first question on their survey. I know it's the question they care the most about. They only have 5 questions on their entire survey. They get right to it. They don't want candidates to be confused about what they care about. All right, moving on. Educational tool. So remember that for a lot of these candidates, they don't know anything about your issue. This is the first time they're going to be introduced to your issues, your organization, and most candidates will probably read it, even if they don't fill it out. They'll at least scan it. So even if you don't think you'll get a lot of returns, the questionnaire is a great way to get people to learn about you. Again, from that Inks survey, they included a definition of charter schools because some candidates might not know what they are or some specifics about it. There's a paragraph that you're welcome to read here, but that just explains that information, and they use it as an educational tool.
They also will use this information to inform their platform. There's a lot of candidates that are running for a wide array of reasons, and your issue might not be one of them. And what you'll find in certain sectors, like for example, education, most people who run for office are kind of agnostic on education. they hear a good idea and they run with it. And so we've had this happen several times where people have adopted our exact language right into their platform because it sounds good to them, because you provided them the data, the definition, and to your point, as you said previously, we made it clear, crystal clear on like how this impacts people, why it's good, why it's bad. And so I think this is one of the most underrated values of a questionnaire, is to really be able to influence someone else's platform.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. All right. Next point. Don't make it too long or confusing. Remember who you're writing for. Like Christian was saying, a lot of them may not have that introduction. You keep it simple, keep it direct. If you have a confusing topic, it's okay if it's important, but just make sure you explain it to them very clearly, because they don't know what SEAs are and LEAs and ESA or ESAs, or why one has one S and one has two S's. They're going to get lost. So you need to make sure you write this survey understanding that people aren't going to know a lot. And one thing I pulled from some other friends at Oklahoma Federation for Children, a question they asked in their survey this year was they actually listed a more values-based question. It gets out of the weeds a little bit and just ask them about the value itself of what they're advocating for. So that's something you can do, and it tells you a lot about where the candidate stands.
Yeah, I've also found that people, when it comes to the too long section, is people ask questions that are no-brainers. So for example, we work in very deep blue cities and very deep blue states, and they'll ask real simple basic questions like, would you ensure kids don't get deported in the classroom? And if you're gonna run in California, especially in Los Angeles, if you have any other view other than that, you're just not viable for multiple reasons. But really, this is valuable real estate that you have here. And asking questions like that is really a waste of your time more so than anything else. And plus, it doesn't differentiate things. I think people often write long questions or ask the same question in different ways.
Right.
I love these yes or no questions because they get straight to the point. If you find yourself asking the same question 5 different ways because you know the mental gymnastics the opponent or the alternative talking points are, the best thing you can do is just ask a yes or no question and be really direct with it. Because when you get into those mental gymnastics, it's very easy for them to get lost, their answer to get lost in the breeze, and you don't really know where they stand on issues.
Yep. Good advice. And then the last point for this presentation is give them room to write. So candidates like to pontificate. A lot of them run for office because they have opinions and they want people to hear them. I speak from experience. So candidates like to talk a lot. Give them the opportunity. So like what Christian is saying, focus in on the key questions. Be very specific on the ones that matter, your litmus test questions. But give them a little opportunity here and there to just talk about what's on their mind on their survey. It doesn't hurt you to do that. I like it because it gives you get to know what they care about on education or whatever issue it is that you're working on. So another example I pulled from the Oklahoma survey. What do you think the state of Oklahoma does well regarding K-12 education? It doesn't hurt you to ask that question, and we'll tell you immediately what their priorities are in their election when it comes to education. And you might find out if your issues are their priority or not. So I like that. It lets candidates get that off their vest or off their chest, and they won't complain about not being able to opine a little bit. So Christian, I have a question about this questionnaire process for you. Do you make incumbents who have a track record fill out a questionnaire?
Yes, I do. Look, I think there's no, rule book, but I think if they're a champion and they're loud and proud about it, and they're not in a competitive race, maybe not. I do think what you do get out of these questionnaires is they're almost a marketing tool, especially if it's a champion. If it's a champion and they write glowing reviews about the issue and the policy you've been working on for a number of years, that's something that can really motivate your membership, can really motivate your donors, and just the public to get behind it, because I'm sure that presents some goodwill with the public. I think the opposite is true too. Like if there's someone in power and they've been in power before and they just despise everything you stand for, this is politics. People love red meat. And so if they're willing to fill out your survey and tell you why you're the worst and they'll never do anything that you want them to do, again, great for your base, great for your donors, and great motivation for planning ahead. So yes, I think you do make people who've been in office and for a while fill these out.
It's important to be consistent, I think, because you give one person an exception and then you've lost them all. Besides, I always like to blame some higher up. So hey, listen, I'm sorry, my boss is making me do it. Come up with whatever you need. Also, they've supported you in the past. You don't know for sure they're with you on the next thing. So it is a difficult conversation. Just be respectful and kind, but consistent. All right, so we're on next. So they wrote it down, but that's not enough. You want to make them tell you too. And that essentially comes down to candidate interviews. So why do we do candidate interviews? First point, they don't always write their own surveys. It would shock you. Certainly at the federal level, they don't, but even at the lower level, occasionally they have campaign aides, campaign consultants write it. And those aides and consultants don't have to live with those surveys. So a lot of times they'll be, because they know their candidate needs to say something to win the support of a certain interest group or whatever, they will often write it in a way that will win that support. And the candidate may not actually agree with that or may have more nuance to their answer. I've run into this before. So you need to sit down face to face and make sure it's their own words. And the next thing is that just like the survey, this is a great introduction to your cause. It's the time when they're most willing to listen and meet with you. It's when they're most willing to have their guard down a little bit and understand the issue. And it's before they've made lots of commitments to groups. They're more of a clean slate. So these candidate interviews are really important for that. And it also begins to build a relationship with them. I like to do it in their hometown if possible. They're more comfortable there. You get to see them in their surroundings and build a better connection. Next, you need to enter the meeting with a plan and a goal. So this isn't a lobbying meeting. This isn't a meeting where you're holding their feet to the fire. This is all about, it's not about grilling them. It's all about building up to your endorsement process. So that is your goal for this meeting. And what I would say, you should have an agenda coming into it, not maybe a formal one, but you should know how you want this conversation to proceed. You should make an introduction and make connections that build that relationship. So that should be your first goal. You should get a sense of why they're running. That we'll talk more about that next week. And then you should identify whether they support your issue and how intensely. And then lastly, be prepared for a short meeting or a long meeting. You need to be respectful for their time. They may want to talk for a long time. They might start the meeting by saying, hey, I'm really sorry, I have 15 minutes. Let's work through this. So you have to be ready to work through your agenda and ask the questions you need in whatever's thrown at you. And if they want to have a longer conversation, great. So that's your plan. Nextly, intensity and understanding matters. So one thing is they may come at you at a lower level of knowledge of your issue. They may come at a higher level of knowledge. Be prepared to have an intelligent conversation with them wherever they are, which means you probably need to have the talking points and materials thought out ahead of time for the different levels of knowledge that a candidate has of your issue. And then lastly, if their intensity matters, because you want to know if they're a champion. You want to feel out if they're a champion, because that's going to determine the level of support you might give them. Are they just a supporter, or there's someone that's going to be a change maker for you at the process, for you at whatever office or body you're working with. And then lastly, if you have a board, this is a great way to engage them. This is a great way to engage your grassroots, bring them to the interviews. They get to see the real people that support your cause, and your board and your grassroots gets more bought into the process and the candidates. So Christian, those are my quick 5 bullet points. Is there anything else you would add to what I'm throwing out there?
No, I just can't stress this enough. I think what a lot of first-time organizations or someone like building up, scaling their political advocacy arm, they view this as, I'm going to speak truth to power, and they take these meetings and they show up and they grill them, and this isn't that place. When people are running for a candidate, you're essentially trying to make as many allies as possible because you're not sure who's going to get elected. You're not even sometimes sure if you're going to get involved in this race, depending on other viability factors. So I can't stress that one enough. But and also like this is great. Again, I use the phrase red meat a lot, but I think this is great red meat for your membership, for your staff, and for the board.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're going a little long here. Apologize just because we had the intro that we aren't going to have most weeks, but we'll move through here pretty quick so we can get you guys wrapped up. Last point, corroborate. We all have those people in our lives. They tell us it, they write it down, but they're still a little wishy-washy. That's no different than candidates. We have 3 main points here. Don't stop evaluating. First, allies. Talk to your allies. What have those candidates told them? Are they being consistent in what they're telling the various entities? In fact, I actually have worked with allies before to ask the same question on multiple questionnaires so that we're seeing consistency across the gamut. Next, public events. Pay close attention to the newspaper, to blogs, to events you go to, and make sure they're saying publicly what you heard privately. And that gets to the third point, under pressure. Sometimes it's not just about what they believe, it's do they have the guts to say it and lead it publicly, especially if your issue is more controversial. Because I guarantee you if they're shaky now, they're not going to get better when they get elected. So a lot of times I have put candidates on the spot, even if our issue isn't one that's being discussed in the election. I might make sure an advocate asks a question at a debate or a forum, or look for a newspaper article or something. So I've tried to push them on that. And because really, I think nothing tells you more about their preparation, commitment, and confidence in your issue than a public under pressure situation. Christian, but what do you do if they flake? How do you deal with that? So you did all this stuff, but they're not, now they're going off kilter. What do you do?
You got to have a very frank conversation. I think that's first and foremost. You have to confront them, obviously not in an antagonistic way, but again, using your example, you have bosses, you have people, you have a board, and so on and so forth to respond to. You're responsible for this budget and for these resources, and you have to have a frank conversation with them. I think there's nothing wrong with asking clarifying questions and essentially corroborating what they've put in writing. What have you done in the past, Jonathan?
100%. You don't want to have that call. It's uncomfortable, but I would just tell people it is much better to have it up front, even if it means, now you might still support them because they're still better than their opponent. You have to remember that it's not always, you have 2 options, usually not many, but I would tell you, even if it means you're able to support them at this stage, you're way better off having this conversation, because I've seen situations go into after the election and you are upset because you think they lied to you and that hurts the relationship, and they resent you for holding them to something they're uncomfortable about. Lose, 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 lose. You're better off being on the same page, and I would say you're probably more likely. So I want candidates to tell me what they believe, not what they think I want them to believe, because you're much better off. Whether that means you don't support them now or you do, I think you're going to have a much better relationship with them.
And I think it also goes back to consistency, right? Like if the best thing you can do as an organization is be consistent, so people know where you stand and what the benefits or repercussions are if they don't align with your values. And so that might be more aggressive advocacy during legislation period. It might be more antagonistic or campaigning against them in electoral. But you won't be known for anything if you aren't consistent. And so I think being able to have frank conversations and know where people are at, and let them know as well that like we can't support you because of X or whatever it may be, goes a real long way.
But I have good news for you, Christian. I have good news. It worked out. We give this candidate an A+. They filled out their survey. It's 100%. I've never seen a better survey. The interview went awesome. They could do my job. Like really, like they're excellent. They're saying everything in the media I want them to say. They're consistent. This is great. We are all set. We're moving forward. We're endorsing them. We're going to get them to support them. All done. Right, Christian?
Not so fast, actually.
Wait. Oh, okay.
And that leads us to next week. How to tell they're viable. Some have heard this phrase, some haven't. This means, can they get elected? And I can't tell you the amount of times local state directors have come to me and said, I have the perfect candidate. They're amazing on our values. They're in the community. They're a known entity. By the way, they are the local chapter leader of the MAGA support here in Los Angeles. They have 100 members, and we're trying to run them, in a Democratic seat that Hillary Clinton won, 90 to 10. Or they refuse to raise money. They think money shouldn't be in politics. They think it's ugly, and they won't campaign. So I've had all those. We'll talk about how to deal with those issues and how to find out if people are viable or not next week.
Good. All right. I'm excited about it. And I don't think we had I didn't see any questions pop up that we didn't address during the presentation. So, we'll, next week, feel free to send questions ahead of time about the topics that you might have, or if you see something interesting in the news related to elections that you want to talk to us about. My email is in the webinar invite, so you can send those questions to us to help guide us for next week. And so just wrapping up here, thanks for joining us. We have our Twitter handles here, JN_50can and Christian_LA. I just started my Twitter account. I'm going to focus on nonpartisan political commentary, just on these kind of topics, observing what's going on in elections, and giving folks feedback on that.
And I will try to do the same. Mine has been active, but not really. So I will do a better job to pose thought-provoking things like what's interesting and other stuff. We do have one question. We know we're over time, so if people have to go, we thank you enormously for participating in this first one. We promise we will get better and be respectful of your time. Please join us next week. And please feel free to share this far and wide with whoever you think might be interested or share this with us. And if you do have questions, we're willing to stay on if you are, and we'll answer those questions. So feel free to put them in the chat. First question we have here is, do we have sample questionnaires we can share? Jonathan, do you have any that you're able to share?
I can do that. I think one thing I would say is, like, the two organizations that we shared surveys from, Inc.'s Action and American Federation for Children, I would say I defer to them on, they're easy to track down, defer to them on their own survey. I don't want to throw out other people's information without their permission. We do have some, so I would say for anyone that wants a copy of the sample questionnaire, just shoot me an email, and like I said, it's on the webinar information, and I'll find out specifically what you're looking for, and we can go from there. So
yeah, we have quite a few here we can send over. You can't stress this enough. It's all about local context. So we're hoping they'll be helpful. I know writing the questionnaires seems challenging and kind of a high threshold, but it's really easy. And you can make it as complex as you want or as simple as you want. Jonathan showed us that, but we're happy. Just go ahead and email Jonathan and I, and we're happy to send whatever resources we can.
Yep. All right, here we go. I got the questions up now. First question: do you interview everyone? What if the questionnaire responses don't align? Do you interview them? So let's answer that one first. So do you interview everyone, Christian?
We do. We want to make, again, being consistent. We send the questionnaire to everyone, even if they, from the forefront, have told us they hate us. And we invite them to participate. So our endorsement process is kind of lengthy. They get, they meet with the local director or manager of the site. They meet with our lead members to have an informal Q&A. We send them a questionnaire that's usually about 15 to 20 questions long. And then we invite everyone to participate in a robust Q&A with our broader membership based on the questions and answers they provided us. Everyone gets invited to it. That way, no one can say we are planning against them or whatever. We want to make sure that we're fair to everyone.
And I would say, I think this is one of those things where there's a little bit of nuance to how you apply it. I don't disagree with Christian's process at all. I think sometimes you have to look at how much time and resources you have. And so I would say send the questionnaire to everyone. No doubt, you never know what you're going to find out. But I think if you have a process like Christian that makes interviewing a lot of candidates easy, that's good. If you don't have that process, I would say you should be selective on how you use your time and which races are going to be more valuable or important. And if you're in the question asked, if the questionnaire responses don't align, meaning they're not with you, do you interview them still? And I would say generally no. Like there's no reason to go in and just have an argument with someone if you know they're not with you. It's just, that's probably worse than not interview them. I would say the only way I would interview someone in that context is, are they in a really important race and there's a lot to sort out? Like there's a possibility that both candidates are pretty bad and you want to find out maybe if someone's a little closer to you. But I usually only will do it if I see some seeds of opportunity. It's insulting to them. Like, oh, I'm going to waste your time for 1 hour and then I'm going to go endorse your opponent. Like that to me is not polite as well. So
Yeah, I agree with that. Be smart and wise with your time. Some people do take these questionnaires and they're antagonistic. So obviously, if they're antagonistic with the responses, don't waste your time, flat out. Now, Jonathan's point is like sometimes it's picking between the better of two evils, and then that's when you do have to have these questionnaires. So, Reagan had that saying like 80-20 rule. If you're 80% with me, you're with me all the way. And I think there's some truth when it comes to this kind of vetting process.
Good. All right, we have another question that just popped up. Given the current circumstances, do you recommend interviewing electronically for those weighing in on the primaries? So, Christian, what do you think? Do you do electronic interviews?
Yeah, I mean, we really don't have much of a choice now. I think you have to. I think you learn a lot. Even though you're talking to a screen, I think there's a great immense value in hearing it from their mouth. To your point, you don't ever know who's writing their answers for them.
Agreed. It's important, and you have no other option. And I think people understand that at this stage. So, we have another question about sharing surveys. Again, I just would repeat, if that's something you're interested, contact us and either Christian or me through email, and we can provide you one or connect you with people that have those resources.
Yeah, there's a lot of great organizations out there that have like rubrics for their interviews. Like they score them on their answers and things of that nature. So that's the next level up. If your organization has like those kind of rubrics for interviews, not just a questionnaire, I think you're far ahead of the game as well. So if you know anyone that has that, feel free to take advantage of that as well. And we're happy to share the resources.
Great. All right, Christian, any good words to send us off?
No, just thanks to everyone who showed up. Appreciate your questions and attention, and looking forward to it next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.